So hello and welcome to the video. Now straight off the bat I'm going to make a prediction. You're either going to watch this video all the way to the very end, or you're going to think I'm completely mad and you'll only watch for about another 30 seconds. And you won't think I'm mad because of the hat. I've made a few videos now about tier point runs, and I am planning one for later this year, so you will see some more videos crop up on the channel. But there are some aspects of tier point running that I've never talked about before, certainly not in any detail. So in this video I'm going to talk about 6 things you need to know if you are planning or executing a tier point run. Anyone who has no idea what a tier point run is has probably already gone, but if you are still watching and you have no idea what a tier point run is, it's a trip that's been booked with the gathering of tier points as a primary objective. Gathering tier points gives you status with airlines, which brings you benefits when you travel. The Sunday Times recently ran an article about people who travel to Hawaii for 45 minutes, and gathering tier points is almost certainly the reason why they embarked on something so superficially silly. So if you'd like to hear about 6 reasonably advanced aspects of tier point running and would like to learn some cool acronyms on the way, stick around! Hi, I'm Matt. I've lived in 5 countries on 4 continents. I've flown over 1.4 million miles. I've visited over 100 countries, every American state, but I'm nowhere near done. So subscribe and you might pick up some hacks, hints and tips to make your next trip better. The first acronym is HBO, not the American movie channel, but hand baggage only. A relatively simple point here, but a tier point run is best done HBO, just with carry-on. The purpose of a tier point run is to chain together a sequence of flights in short order so as to maximise the tier points earned. Every connection made is an opportunity for checked baggage to go astray, and some of those connections can be very short. If you need a lot of stuff at your ultimate destination, checking a bag is no guarantee that the bag will actually get there when you do. This will come up again in a couple of points' time, but checking a bag also requires interaction with check-in agents, and reaching the check-in area can be inconvenient and in some cases will be impossible when doing these sorts of trips. I'll come back to this. And finally on this point, a tier point run may well include a very inconvenient last leg which takes you away from your home airport to Budapest, to Bucharest or Sofia, for example. It may be very tempting to drop that last leg and just head straight for home when you arrive in your home country. But you shouldn't, as dropping a leg is technically a breach of the conditions of carriage. Repercussions from the airline can be quite significant, although they're rare, and you would have to be a frequent sinner in the eyes of the airline for them to take action against you. But don't drop the last leg, unless you do. If you have checked baggage though, you won't be able to drop the last leg, as the airline will have checked your bag through to your final destination. It's nigh impossible to get an airline to short check your bags because they are aware of this issue and won't do anything to make it easier for people to skip legs. Bear in mind though that if you fly with checked luggage and fly into Heathrow but are scheduled to fly out of somewhere different, such as City Airport for example, the airline will have to give you your bags back at Heathrow because they can't through check luggage between airports. But don't drop the last leg. Right, point 2, and it's another acronym, B2B, meaning back to back. This is the practice of flying into and out of an airport on the same plane. You minimise the time spent in a destination by leaving it at the first possible opportunity. This topic is a weird combination of the really quite safe and the extremely risky, and on balance I consider it to be quite risky, so have never personally attempted it, although there are many people out there who don't think twice about booking a back-to-back as part of a tier point run. Ex-EU tier point runs start from outside of the United Kingdom, so if BA only services that port once a day, you will probably think that you have to fly the day before your primary itinerary starts in order to be in that city ready to take the flight back. But that adds time and expense in terms of accommodation and taxis and food and so on. I quite like spending a day somewhere random and consider that to be part of the experience of a tier point run, but there are plenty of people for whom it is just an inconvenience. And strictly, those extra costs should be taken into account in calculating the total cost of the tier points that you're earning. But if you start your itinerary with a back-to-back, you'll be flying out and back to London on the same day, which will save you time and money, even if it adds risk. You have to travel hand baggage only if attempting a back-to-back, as you will not have the time or the opportunity to go near the check-in desks at your turnaround airport. You will also need to have checked in for your primary itinerary before you leave London. There won't be time to do that when you land in the turnaround country. This can be done online, but can also usually be done in London before you take that first positioning flight. So there are really three types of airports. The first are those which commingle arriving and departing passengers, places such as Amsterdam and Copenhagen. These are considered very low risk for a back-to-back. Not zero risk, but very low risk. There is still a risk though, because if your arriving flight requires a bus gate to take you to the terminal, you may be deposited in the terminal at a distance from the departure gate that you need to rapidly get to. Plus, the departure process will have started earlier because the airline will have to add time to get people out to the plane on the bus. And although it's very unlikely to happen at an outstation, it is possible that the return service will be operated by a different plane if the airline is swapping equipment out for maintenance at that outstation. But even taking into account these unlikely situations, attempting a back-to-back somewhere like Amsterdam is probably still lower risk than trying to fly in to connect to your flight the same day on a different aircraft or a different airline. And you do have to take this very seriously, because missing that first flight will mean all the remaining flights on your itinerary will automatically be cancelled, and it can be an absolute nightmare to get any of it reinstated. The second type of airport are smaller locations where either there's a well-established transfer process in place, or the airport is small enough to allow you to get through the arrival and the departure formalities in less time than it takes the aircraft to turn around. Bucharest and Gibraltar are two examples of these sorts of airports. Bucharest because there is a transfer lane, and Gibraltar because it's very, very small. Sitting up front on your inbound flight is quite important here because it will give you an advantage when getting off the plane. Dublin is an example of an airport where it is possible to get into the country and then back out again in less time than the plane takes to turn around, but any delay at immigration or at the security checkpoints may well derail you. And even though you're going to physically be in the country, there will certainly not be time to emigrate and make it to the check-in desk to dump some luggage. Plus the check-in desks may well have actually closed around the same time as your plane landed. The final type of airport is one where passengers are not commingled and the airport is large. Paris, Charles de Gaulle and Cairo are examples where you would not even attempt a back-to-back. I would personally consider a back-to-back in that first category of airports, but I wouldn't consider it at all in any other. I quite like to travel the day before, but if for whatever reason I can't, I will schedule at least 4 hours on the ground in my turnaround airport. Plus, I'll usually have a backup plan in mind, either an alternate flight if the one I'm intending to take is cancelled, or even an alternate airport if things get really dodgy. To help with this, there is a very handy guide on the Flyer Talk website which goes through all of the airports BA serves and rates them for back-to-back ability. This list though is a little dated now, and the consequences of the you-know-what plus Brexit may have had an impact on some of the ratings given. But a back-to-back to start an itinerary is not good for the blood pressure, and I will restate that I've never attempted one. You do though, I gather, get some very funny looks from the crew when you get back on a plane that you left only a few minutes earlier. Right, point 3 and a quickie, stopover versus transfers, SVT if we want to acronymise this one. I've talked about this before, but a transfer is a stop at an airport that lasts for less than 24 hours. A stopover is a stop that lasts for more than 24 hours. Stopovers are usually permitted on the type of fare that facilitates a tier point run, although there will almost certainly be an extra fee levied for them. And that may be fine, but it will increase the cost per tier point of the itinerary. But a number of transfers will be allowed on your fare and they won't cost you anything. I've added 23-hour transfers in the past in Vegas and in San Francisco, which has given me time to get out and see a little bit of the city without adding any cost to my core ticket. I've shown before how to force a longer layover via ITA Matrix, and I will be showing it again in an upcoming video. Point 4 is a biggie. It's MPM, maximum permitted mileage. Every fare has an MPM, although they are quite tricky to find. It's one thing ITA Matrix won't show you. When you've found a fare, if you click on the blue rules link, it will show you pages and pages of mumbo jumbo, most of which can be safely ignored, some of which is critical, but none of which contains the MPM. But Expert Flyer will show you it, not in the fare rules section, which you might expect, but in a separate section dedicated to this subject. It's under the Travel Information tab. Following through on that Finnair flight, here is the MPM table for that fare. A direct flight would be 6,030 miles, if there was one. The system has worked out that the shortest ticketable routing between those city pairs is 6,067 miles. I had a quick look and Copenhagen seemed to be the logical intermediate point, but I'm not sure there are direct flights to Vegas from Copenhagen, and that was only 6,042 miles anyway. You get the idea. Anyway, this MPM is the minimum ticketable distance between city pairs plus 20%. This 20% rule is the reason why you can't route through Los Angeles on a fare from London to Miami. The added mileage takes the distance way beyond the maximum miles allowed. It's also the reason why it's easier to add a Helsinki shuffle to a West Coast itinerary than it is to an East Coast itinerary. And that's because the distance to the West Coast gives you more wriggle room for those extra miles. And it's the reason why you can very rarely add Helsinki both outbound and return. Now, I don't, and I'm sure most people don't, maintain a spreadsheet of mileage when you are trying to create a fare. And that's because the fare engines will do it all for you behind the scenes. Plus, there are some additional rules that are even harder to find that affect the MPM calculation. So this is something which you need to know exists, even if there's not a lot you can proactively do to manage it. I'll quickly share two complications which make this difficult to play along with at home. Firstly, there can be more than one MPM between city pairs depending on the routing. So Singapore to New York, ticketed by Singapore via the Pacific, has an MPM of 11,512. But if you go via the North Atlantic, you have 12,614 miles to play with. And secondly, you can have miles added or deducted to your routing based on whether you travel through specified airports. Airlines want to drive traffic through certain hubs, so there are certain incentives built into the MPM calculation that drive this. These rules are very well hidden. But the bottom line is that MPM is the reason why fares will suddenly jump up if you add an extra leg and may disappear entirely if you add several extra legs. And although it's very difficult to reverse engineer this, you do need to keep it in mind. If New York to San Francisco to San Diego blows out the fare that you're looking at, try a more direct routing such as New York to Las Vegas to San Diego, because that's 506 miles shorter. That saving may free up the headroom you need to make a stop in Helsinki work. Number 5 is more a consequence of tier point running than it is an input into planning one, but tier point runs do impact on it, so I am going to include it here. It's another acronym too, CIV. This stands for Corporate Individual Value and is BA's rating of how valuable you are as a customer to them. It's a metric that's internal to BA, so it's quite difficult to find out what your CIV is, and the staff are expressly forbidden from sharing them. Although, if you really want to know, you can write to BA's Data Protection Officer and get them to tell you as part of the Data Protection Act. I gently grumbled a few videos back that I very rarely, if ever, get a gold welcome when I'm on board a flight. I get the gold benefits, but the reason why the purser will never come and speak to me may very well be because I have a terrible CIV. And thanks to A Driver for leaving me a comment which reminded me of this. BA doesn't advertise how they calculate CIVs, but the various bandings are known, and this table is taken from an excellent Head for Points article on the subject. I'll link to it in the description below. In the years when I do fly a bit to renew my gold status, I very rarely go much over the 1500 tier points I need, and I think I've only ever once gone over 1600 tier points in a year. And I pay very little for those flights too, which means my CIV value could be down in the 30s, even though I am quite a long-standing gold member now. So if a purser is tasked with greeting the top 3 ranked gold members by CIV value, it's probably quite unlikely that that will ever include me. So if you get your gold status via cheap Charlie tier point runs like I do, you'll get the gold benefits, but you may not get that warm, fuzzy gold embrace that bigger spenders get from BA. CIV might also be a criteria used in determining who gets upgrades, but I've done quite well in that regard over the years, which might not be the case if my CIV really is down in the 30s. But I don't really care what my CIV is, to be honest. I always enjoy flying in the cabin I've booked, and any upgrade is a wonderful bonus. And I don't really mind skipping that awkward forced chat that you might otherwise have with a purser, just as long as they let me through the first wing. And finally, point 6 is another acronym, ORC, Original Routing Credit. I'll pause for a second to allow my Australian viewers to stop giggling. This is the principle where you can claim the avios and tier points of the flight you actually booked if disruption means you don't actually get to take those flights. Let's say you've booked Budapest to London to New York to Los Angeles to Las Vegas, and let's say the flight from London to New York was delayed such that you missed the onward leg to Los Angeles. The airline will try and book you directly into Las Vegas, and indeed that may be the only option that's left available to you on your day of travel. This will cost you a few avios as it's less miles physically flown, but most importantly it will cost you the 40 tier points that you would have got on that extra flight from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. So when you get home, you just have to make a claim with British Airways and you should pick up the extra avios and the extra tier points that you missed out on, and they should give it to you. This actually can be quite a good thing. If your Budapest to London flight was delayed, you might actually quite like taking a direct flight from London to Las Vegas and save yourself the hassle of having to get there via 3 flights. But crucially, ORC does not mean that you will get the avios and the tier points that you booked if there is a change to the travel plans before you travel. Flights regularly get cancelled and rescheduled, and the automated engine that sorts these out may well assume that the original bonkers indirect routing was booked in error and will rebook you on something that is nice and direct and straightforward that yields far fewer tier points. You can't just fly what you're given and make a claim for the tier points that you booked. Instead, you will have to replan the itinerary that you want, call the airline and get them to rebook you on that complex itinerary that delivers the tier points you expect. It's a pain, but it might also actually be an opportunity, as the rebooking rules are often a little looser than the original rules you had to fight your way through to make the original booking. So there you go, 6 advanced aspects of tier point runs. And congratulations if you made it all the way to the end. I really look forward to seeing the analytics of this video to see how many people actually do make it. Thanks for watching. Please give this video a like, subscribe if you're new, leave me a comment. Did you learn something? And if you'd like to support what I'm doing more directly, there is a Patreon account, the link to which is in the description below. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.